Hey, Armand here with a short little story about Uranus in Gemini from 2025 through 2033, inclusive of him bouncing back and forth between the end of Taurus and the beginning of Cancer, at either end of those, substantially between 2025 and 2032. However, that's 7 years. Uranus spends about 7 years in a sign. That's what we would expect. Okay, so let's see. Uranus, I won't be doing things for individual signs this time around, by the way. If you have Sag rising, that should be something interesting in your relationship life. Aquarius involved, perhaps. But we're just going to leave that be for this time around. Talk about the general overview of Uranus and Gemini. That's enough. Here's the key word for Uranus and Gemini: ingenuity. Ingenuity. Gemini, the sign that has most to do with the thinking mind and our approach to ideas and concepts at a very basic kind of level, has a lot to do with communication, has a lot to do with transportation, and Uranus, the revolutionary planet that has much to do with changes and innovations. And so we get this keyword of ingenuity, finding new ways to do things and new inventions and things like that. Well, we are awash in inventions and stuff like that, of course. And with Pluto and Aquarius, we've already discussed AI and stuff like that. But yes, I do think that we will have an acceleration of this with Uranus in Gemini. Listen to what happened to the last time Uranus was in Gemini, 1942 to 1949. List of things that were invented at the time or functionalized would include things like radar and sonar, jet engines, rocket technology, just as a general kind of thing. It was I mean, there's ingenuity that went into the atomic power and the atomic bomb. That certainly was happening with Uranus and Gemini last time around. We also had, from the dialysis machines, we also had at that time, just as not all heavy and serious stuff, we also had the invention of very Gemini things like Velcro and silly putty, and my personal favorite, the slinky. So those all Uranus and Gemini. Playful stuff in some respects. The Aqualung, Jacques Cousteau. Used to watch Jacques Cousteau's show on Sunday nights there, the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Invented the Aqualung during the 1940s, during the Uranus and Gemini period. Notice how many of these things have to do with Gemini kinds of things like flight and communication, or even lungs, which are ruled by Gemini. So we will see a kind of acceleration. Now, in part, Uranus landed in Gemini. That was his first visit to the sign since the conjunction of Neptune and Pluto in the sign back in the 1890s. And so we really got a burst of it that time around, but we, in a way, continue to get it. And we will see, especially with Uranus connecting with Pluto in Aquarius, we will see some interesting kinds of manifestation. So again, ingenuity, new ways to do things, especially having to do with transportation. Maybe those self-driving cars will finally show up. And we will see all things to do with communication. I can't imagine, of course, now that I already have, incredible communication skills or abilities, not skills, uh, in my hand as it is. But, who knows where it will go next? We don't know. And it's hard to predict where things will go with Uranus and Gemini, but ingenuity is the key word for Uranus and Gemini. So keep a mind on that. Now, Uranus is going to be pretty busy during his stay in the sign. Um, but the starting point is where the action really is. Uranus is connecting with Saturn and Neptune, who are at the very beginning of Aries, in a constructive sextile aspect. Let's talk a little bit about that. They're in Aries, And, when we talk about the ingenuity and the things that they were working on in the 1940s, a lot of it, you don't have to be an astrologer. In fact, if you're not an astrologer, what people would say was that a lot of that technology came out as a result of the Second World War. And now, with Saturn and Neptune in the potentially bellicose sign of Aries, you might think, wow, is that a replay? I don't think it necessarily is. I certainly hope that it isn't. That might definitely spurn a little bit of technology, spawn a little bit of technology. Spurning is different. Then that happens early on. And then in 2026 through 2028, Uranus in Gemini is going to be trine to Pluto in Aquarius. Now, we've already talked a lot about Pluto in Aquarius, so I won't belabor that. It's power to the people and so on, but it's also a lot to do with mass communication and who controls it. And now we have, and it's also Uranus's home sign. He's the ruler of Aquarius. And so Uranus in Gemini, an air sign, making a nice connection to Pluto in Uranus's home sign of Aquarius, also an air sign. Wow, that really seems like an acceleration of all things having to do with communication and so on. So early on in Uranus's stay, which is probably when you're watching this, early on in Uranus's stay in Gemini is where we're likely to see the fastest movement. After that, I mean, my gosh, I don't know what fast movement means if not what we're experiencing now anyway. But we'll see. We'll see. There's new stuff coming all the time, and we're going to see what it is. I think that there's something very hopeful about Uranus in Gemini and making all these connections, and the idea that we can kind of get past some of the, although Gemini is a dual sign, and get past some of the dualities. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Certainly, I could imagine a darker side to all of these things, the connections there. But, I like to think that things will go well and nicely. That's a and there's some reason to think that's all harmonious aspects. Now, particular interest to the United States chart, because in the chart of the United States, Uranus is in Gemini. Now, Uranus has an 84-year cycle since it spends 7 years in each of the 12 signs. And the United States chart has always resonated very strongly with its Uranus return. We've had 2 of them so far, and we're due for our 3rd one in this cycle of Uranus in Gemini. Well, at the first Uranus return, that was 84 years after the beginning of the country in 1776. And so that brought us up into the 1860s, and we had the Civil War. That was at our first Uranus return. And of course, Abraham Lincoln's 7 years ago, but they were a few years into the Civil War at that point. So we're talking really about the first time around it was the Civil War. Not a happy thought. The second time around was the end of the Second World War, and the United States became a world power. Some would even say the world power, certainly the power in the Western world. And that was a great shift. Almost everybody who's alive today would almost take it for granted that the United States was an important, or sometimes the most important planet on the world stage, planet on the world stage, country on the world stage. And that would not be entirely unreasonable assessment, I don't think. Certainly in terms of influence, if not integrity, then the United States has had that role for the last 84 years. And I would have to suspect that things are going to change again as we get to our 3rd Uranus return. Again, the first time around, Civil War, second time becoming one of the most dominant world powers, and the third time around, who knows? But it's certainly something that we would be interested to see. It's, well, interested or concerned, depending upon how you look at it. But I think that this is likely to be a big turning point for the United States. We are past our Pluto return. That happened back in the early years of this decade, the 2020s. And it depends how you count, stuff like that. But basically, in this time frame, we've had our Pluto return, and its effects are manifest. And the effect of the Uranus return is likely to be much more overt and much more telling than the Pluto return. It's the Pluto return was spelling out deeper issues within the country. The Uranus return will have surface manifestations. And it's going to happen after that Pluto Uranus trine that I was talking about. But I wouldn't focus too much on any one given point in time here when it comes to the next 7 years. I would think that what we're really looking at here is a process that's already underway and is going to accelerate, particularly to get to the US Uranus return, particularly in the next 3 to 4 years. It's spending 7 years there, but I don't think we'll be out of the 2020s before we really see what we have brought up out of things and how it has manifested. All right, that's to give you something to think about.